All right, so today I'm going to be talking about programming for Amazon Alexa. Literally, it's going to be a very simple, straightforward agenda. We're going to give you a little bit of introduction. We'll get on to our story on what we did around, very briefly around what we did in terms of Alexa itself. We'll start creating a skill. We'll show you an example. I need to switch this thing off, or it'll start picking up every time I say Alexa and respond. We'll talk about creating a skill itself, and then we'll talk about some of the considerations. If you're thinking about creating a skill on Alexa, what are the things that you need to do about? And then we'll finish up with a few more demos and wrap it all up. So what is Alexa? Well, Alexa is Amazon's voice service and brain behind the likes of the Echo family of devices. So whenever you want to, there are two things about it primarily. So when you're interacting with a device like this, you basically say Alexa and then say whatever you want it to do. So, but effectively, Alexa is the service that Amazon hosts that processes all the input that you actually give through these devices and then does stuff with it. That's what Alexa does. My name is Mahesh Krishnan. I work as a principal technologist at AGL.
And I'm Terence the Grange. I'm a solution architect at AGL as well.
Yeah, and of course, we both at AGL. If you didn't know much about AGL, AGL is an energy company. It's one of the largest energy companies in Australia, and we both not only produce electricity, but we also retail. We retail it as well. So when we launched an application, a skill on Alexa, we basically launched a video as well. So quickly play that, and that's actually lost it. Just give me a second while I fix it. Works again. There you go, no audio. We haven't done the sacrifice of demo gods, so a very simple thing like playing audio is suddenly not working. Give it one more shot, or I'll unplug it.
Amazon Alexa is the voice-controlled service that allows you to play music, ask questions, order a pizza, and now get updates on your AGL energy account. All you have to do is ask. Here's how to get your AGL skill up and running with your Amazon Alexa enabled device. Go to the App Store or Play Store on your mobile device, search for Amazon Alexa and download the app. Once you've set up your Amazon Echo, open the Alexa app. Go to the skill page and type AGL into the search bar. If AGL is not showing, you may need to update your country settings for your Amazon Australia account. Find out how at amazon.com.au/Echo Country Settings. Click Enable under the AGL logo. Sign in to your AGL account. If you don't already have an online AGL account, you can create one, or sign up via Facebook, Google, or your Microsoft account. After a few seconds, you should receive a message that your AGL skill was successfully linked. Once registered, you won't need to log in again. Now with the AGL skill, you can get certain information on your account simply by saying, Alexa, ask AGL. Wondering what your energy costs are? Alexa, ask AGL what's my account balance. Going on holiday and want to make sure you don't miss paying your bill? Alexa, ask AGL when my payment is due. Or wondering how you can save on energy? Alexa, ask AGL for an energy tip. There are over 70 energy saving tips for around the home. And if you're ever stuck on what to ask or how to ask it, simply say, Alexa, ask AGL for help. We're continually adding voice features to help you easily manage your AGL account. Let us know what you think by completing our survey at agl.com.au/Alexa skill, or join the AGL community to discuss the AGL skill. Connect to the AGL skill today and start getting your account information on demand simply by saying, "Alexa, ask AGL." Find out more at agl.com.au/Alexa skill.
That kind of gives you a bit of an overview of what the skill itself does. But the bigger question remains, like, why do you want to build a...
Amazon Alexa is the voice...
It is... Completely stop this app. There you go. So the key question is, why do we want to build a skill on Alexa? Now, if you think about what AGL does, I mean, we've got hundreds and thousands of customers, right? And then whenever people want to reach out to us, this may be similar to other industries. You know, if you're in if you're in utilities or telecom or things like that, you may have lots and lots of users. And whenever they want to reach out to a company like AGL, what they do is the first thing that they do is pick up the phone and call us and say, "Hey, I'm moving houses. I want to pay a bill. I've got a question about my bill," and so on and so forth. Now, to cater for that, we have a large set of people answering these calls in call centers, and they cost a lot of money for us. But from a user's perspective, that's not a really great experience as well. So you call and you put on hold, you listen to your hold music, and you don't get to the right person. It's not a really good experience. So we embarked on a customer experience transformation a couple of years ago to make this experience better for them, which, you know, we built things like a better mobile application, better web application, and so on and so forth. We see this voice channel as another way to augment that. Now, there are a number of advantages of this. One is, you know, you can actually multitask. You know, while you're in the comfort of your couch, while you're sitting, you can actually interact with the device and ask it to do things, which is really good. There is another thing where you don't have to, you know, when you're typing on a computer, you know, you do about 40 words a minute or something like that. When you're speaking, you can do much faster. Not only that, it seems a lot more natural for people to ask a question in their own natural language. And it's the ease with which you can actually do it. You can basically not lift a finger. You'll be sitting in your couch and saying, "Well, hey, AGL, can you tell me what my account balance is," and so on and so forth. And from an AGL's perspective, just going through this another channel reduces the cost to serve the customer itself. So it's really good. Now, another reason, of course, is like, how many of you have a smart speaker at home, like a Google Home or an Alexa? See, there's a large number of people who actually put their hand up. Now, we've actually found that the prediction is that this year you will have about 1.28 million smart speakers here in Australia. That's about 13.4% of the population. That's such a large number. Last year, this was about 6%, and but you didn't have Amazon. You know, Amazon hadn't released their devices. I think it was late this last year, or yep. Jan, Feb this year. That's when they actually launched. So we're expecting that number to actually double. So this is a growing channel, and you look at what's going to happen tomorrow. By 2022, there's prediction that 3 million households in Australia will have a device. That's such a large number. So you'll have multiple devices in these homes, and you'll have 3 million houses with these devices. And you look at the smart hub category market itself, in Australia, it's going to be valued at $203 million. This is a huge market. And you find the use of voice everywhere when you're driving a car and, you know, in your house and so on and so forth. So this is also like one of the things, like, you know, it's one of the cool things to do these days. But that's not the only reason that we actually got into it. Now, when Amazon launched in Australia, they had about 4 devices. Literally, they went with. This is one of them. That's the Echo Plus. Now, it's got the speaker and everything else, and it's got like smart hub integration as well to connect to home automation and so on. We've got this much smaller device. This is the Amazon Dot, the Echo Dot. And you'll see this device over here, which is effectively has a little display as well. So it's got a camera, and it's got like a visual display. So in addition to just having voice interfaces, now you've got to start thinking about how would you work when you've got a visual display on it. So that's another thing that you need to think about. So there are literally just these 4 devices that are there in the Australian market. But there are other things like Amazon, you know, they have the Fire TV as well that has Alexa integration. And you have other devices like the Sonos speakers now come with Alexa built in, and so on and so forth. So there's lots and lots of those things coming. In terms of terminology itself, whenever you want to use the device, you say Alexa, and Alexa is effectively the wake word. So whenever it hears the word, it actually wakes up and starts listening to the rest of your conversation. You can customize it. There are a few words that you can actually use. You can change it from Alexa to Amazon, for example, and so on. Or computer. I think there are a few of them that you can actually configure, but that's effectively known as a wake word. So it constantly listens for that, and then it starts to act on it.
So it's quite useful if your daughter's name is Alexa, for example. It's like one of my friends is, yeah.
Yeah. Every time you call her, it starts to respond. Probably not the best thing. So the next thing is you can basically give it instructions. Like you can say, Alexa, play music, and play some music. We'll give you a bit of a demo on that. But if you want to invoke your own application, you got to say ask the name of the application. In our case, it's ask AGL. So AGL is effectively the invocation name. That's the skill invocation name. Think of it more like it's an act name or something like that. And then you have the intent from the skill. So you say, well, ask AGL my account balance. So it looks, once you say my account balance, that's the intent that it actually executes. Sometimes you want to pass parameters to it. So you have an energy bill and a gas bill. You can pass it as parameters. So in Alexa terminology, it's called a slot. So you can have multiple slots, and you say, well, ask AGL for electricity bill or gas bill, and depending on the parameter, you can actually get the different bill for it. So AGL itself, our story, we were literally one of the first companies within Australia to create skills. And we got pretty early on day one launch, we were already there with a skill. And we worked pretty closely with Amazon on it. So we had a partnership, we still do. So when you sign up to an AGL account, we give away free Amazon Echo devices and things like that. It's part of our the partnership agreement with them. And we built about 8 intents so far. So you can go and ask things like, you can ask for energy saving tips. You can find out what your account balance is. If you want to find out what your due date is, you can actually ask that. You can even go and ask some things like, who's AGL CEO? So it'll actually ask those questions. It'll answer those questions as well for you. So let's get creating a skill itself. A skill is effectively the capability that lets you communicate with Alexa, and there are 4 different kinds of skills. So one is the custom skill, which is what we'll be creating today. Think of it like creating a custom application. So you create a custom skill. You have flash briefings. If you want to, what's in the news, you ask the device, and it will actually read it off an RSS feed. You can do that. You also have smart home connectivity. So you can you have smart home skills. So you can ask things like, Alexa, turn on my lights, close my blinds, all those kind of things. You can actually do it. There's also a 4th skill. It's a video skill. This is not available in Australia right now. It'll soon be. You can ask it to play videos, play a video or a movie or whatever it is. You can actually you can do that as well. Now, I keep saying that think of the skill creation as being analogous to an app creation. So much so that you have a skill store. So if you want to add more skills, you can go search in the store and then add those skills across to your device as well. So think about that. In terms of how it all works, you effectively have a person speaking into a speaker, and you say, well, Alexa, ask AGL for account balance. What the Echo device does is it sends the speech to Alexa. So the literal speech, the stream of speech is sent across to Amazon Alexa in the cloud. And it's got multiple things. The 3 main things it does is it's got automatic speech recognition. So it interprets whatever you're saying and does things with it. It's got natural language understanding. So as it gets better and better, it's got better capability to understand what you're trying to say and map it to an intent based on whatever utterance that you actually make. And then it has text-to-speech as well. Think of text-to-speech as the opposite of ASR. So when you have text, it converts into speech and sends it back. So when the request comes in through Amazon Alexa, it goes in and it sends the customer intent to the API endpoint. So if you've got your own API, HTTPS endpoint, it'll actually send it across to that endpoint. This can also be a Lambda function. We'll see that in a bit. It sends it to the API endpoint, and then you send the response back. Now, when you send the response back, you basically send the text, the voice that you want to, the text that you want to be read out to the customer, and you also need to send a visual representation of what you want to show. Now, like I did mention that, like the echo spots and so on, it's got a visual component to it. So you want to make sure that it sends the right cards and so on, so it can actually display that. Alexa will basically convert that into speech, and will send it back to the device itself, and that's what you hear. That's the kind of like high-level overview of the architecture itself. And if you're building a skill on Alexa, it consists of two parts. One is the skill service. This is where all the business logic sits. And when you call, whenever the person basically calls an intent, it goes all the way to your endpoint and executes that business logic. So if you want to go from the business logic, if you want to go hit the database, get some data and read it back, and then send it back to the customer, all that kind of stuff is done in there. Now, effectively, it's either an HTTPS endpoint, or you can actually host it as a Lambda function as well. So, anyone know what Lambdas are? Yeah. So basically, Amazon's serverless, functionality services. Now, you can think of this as the back end, literally, and you can think of the skill interface as the front end. So this is where you create utterances and things like that. What are the things that you need to, what are the words that you use to trigger a certain behavior in the device itself, call the certain intents. So you configure all of those things, and there's something called an intent schema that we'll touch upon shortly. And I did mention about slots and slot types and all that. So you configure all of those things, and then you go over to the developer portal and configure all of these things as well. Now, you start off with the developer portal, and as with anything else, it's a great way to learn. But when you start to create industrial strength, production quality stuff, you're not doing ClickOps anymore. You got your build pipeline and everything else, so you can actually do that. But this is a really good way of showing you how everything works when you're in the developer portal. Now, these are the set of screenshots in terms of how you go about doing this, and we'll actually have a real demo where Terence will show you how it all gets created. But you go into the portal, developer.amazon.com/Alexa, and then you can go click on a Create Skill button. You go fill in the skill name. In this case, I've put in as NDC Sydney. You pick the default language. In this case, it's English US. When you pick English, you see the video skill over there. Otherwise, that won't show up if it's Australia. And in this case, you pick the custom skill. Because you want to create a custom app, you pick the custom skill, and then you basically give an invocation name. Now, this is the name, or this is the invocation word that will be used whenever you say, Alexa, ask NDC Sydney in this case, or ask AGL. So that will be your actual invocation name. The next thing you set up is all your custom intent. So you go in, I've created something called greetings intent. Now, each and every use case that you have will have an intent on its own. Well, kind of, right? So at a very high level, that's what it'll be. So once you create the intent, you go and add utterances. So you will have various, these are the sample utterances. So I can say hello, say hi, say howdy, say good day, whatever it may be, right? So you may have a whole bunch of ways in which you call them. So that's what you do in your utterances. And once you do that, you then tie it to the endpoint. So when that utterance is being called, how do you invoke that intent? When the intent gets invoked, what is the endpoint that it actually calls? You go and set it up over here. Now in this case, it just pointed to a Lambda function. You can also point it to an HTTPS endpoint, as I mentioned earlier. Now that's like kind of like the front end, right? Setting it all up. Now when you go and create the intent and sample utterances and everything else, effectively it all ends up in a JSON file, and we'll see that shortly. So JSON file looks something like this. So you got all the intents, you got the names of the intents. In this case, it's a greeting intent, and those are the sample utterances and everything else. Now, each and everything maps to something in code. So in this case, you go look at greeting intent. What does it do? Literally, it says this.response.speak. G'day, mate. Are you enjoying NDC? That's the response that will be sent back to the user itself. So each and every intent, you'll effectively have a response for each and every one of those things, as you can actually see. That's it. It's pretty simple and straightforward. There's effectively a Node.js file running on Lambda. So let's start looking at a demo. So we'll do a bunch of things, right? So we'll start to interact with the device, get it to call say a few things, and then we'll call the AGC app itself. And yeah, let's get started.
All right. Just going to swap computers for a minute.
Yeah. While you do that, I'll do that.
All right. Thanks. All right. So for those of you who haven't seen one of these before, I'll just give you a couple demos of what it can actually do. Alexa, what's the time?
The time is 3:21 p.m.
Alexa, what's the distance between Melbourne and Sydney?
Melbourne is 712 kilometres from Sydney, as the crow flies.
So it can do things, it's got knowledge behind it, it's got Bing set up behind it, it knows location-based services as well, so you can set that up in the app. It can do things like the weather as well. Alexa, what's the weather in Sydney like today? Alexa, what's the weather in Sydney today?
Right now in Sydney, New South Wales, it's 27 degrees Celsius with clear skies and sun. Today's forecast has mostly sunny weather, with a high of 27 degrees and a low of 10 degrees.
So beats Melbourne any day. Tell me other things you can do. You can hook up to music as well. So we've got some kids in the audience here, so I might just show you how to play some music. Alexa, play the Baby Shark song.
Baby Shark by Pinkfong from Spotify.
You guys might recognize it. That's right. Yeah? All right. Alexa, stop. That was for the adults in the room, I think. I want to show you just quickly now the AGL app that we built. Just show you kind of how that works. Give you a live demo. This is actually linking to my account, so you'll know how much electricity I use. Alexa, open AGL.
Hey Terence, welcome back to AGL. How can I help?
What is my electricity account balance?
You have no outstanding amount on your electricity account. Would you like to know about your gas account as well?
No. All right, so
Would you like to know about your electricity usage?
what does AGL do with renewables?
AGL's greenhouse gas policy presents a pathway for the gradual decarbonisation of our generation portfolio by closing all existing coal-fired power stations by 2050, as well as continuing
Alexa,
to invest in new...
What was my electricity bill in February 2018?
Here's something I found from the article Pacific Gas and Electric Company on Wikipedia.
Alexa, stop.
That's a South African accent, sorry.
That's right.
Mine is worse, I think.
So you can do one slot in questions as well. So you can go, Alexa, ask AGL what was my bill in February 2018?
Is that for electricity or gas?
Electricity.
Your electricity bill for the period of the 19th of January to the 18th of February 2018 was $89.03. Would you like to know about your gas account as well?
No, quit.
One of the things...
Sorry, I don't know
Alexa,
that.
quit.
Please say
Alexa,
yes or...
quit.
So one of the cool things is that we ran a workshop for kids last night. So these are like 10-year-old kids who ended up building an Alexa skill. We ended up calling it NDC. It was a workshop. It's called NDC, right?
NDC, that's right.
Yeah. So the kids basically came up with the kind of questions and everything else, and we helped them program a little bit in Node. But they did it they did a bunch of things in the last maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes. Yeah. They ended up building the skill, right? So with a little bit of help, but we can actually ask a bunch of questions. Alexa, open NDC.
Welcome to the NDC workshop skill. What would you like to know?
Tell me something about NDC.
The NDC conference is aimed at developers and includes a large range of topics.
What's the Wi-Fi password?
The Wi-Fi password is...
Okay, quit.
Sorry, but this skill still needs to teach me how to respond to that.
Alexa,
Please ask something.
Alexa, stop.
So that's kind of the catch-all, right? So anything that you haven't taught it, it says, you know, this skill hasn't yet been taught it, and you can configure that. We actually showed that to the guys in the Amazon booth today. So we've actually got an Alexa down there with some of the actual work that the kids did. So if you want to pop down to have a look at that, it's pretty cool. And they were quite impressed with the kind of the default handler, you know, if anything wasn't programmed into the app.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to show you now is kind of what Mahesh showed you in screenshots. I'm going to walk through a live demo. So fingers crossed this works and technology holds up. So I'm in developer.amazon.com right now. I'm in the Alexa console. You'll see a bunch of skills if you've previously created them. So, you know, I've got a couple of skills that I do personally. So for example, I've got the one that's in production, and you can see the one that's in development, right? So we're going to start off just by creating a new skill and walk you through the interface. So we'll create one for NDC Workshop. And we select Australia. So this is the store that it'll be deployed in. For the AGL skill, we've got it deployed in Australia. So then it picks up all the Australian slang and things like that, right? At the bottom you saw, once I changed to Australia, it drops off the video one as well, right? So this is kind of what's available. We'll click on Create Skill, and that brings us into the console, which I'm going to start from scratch. All right. Is the font size big enough for those at the back? Is that all right? Cool. All right. On the left-hand side, this is kind of the menu where it'll do a lot of kind of the interactions. You've got some information down here, and you kind of got a checklist as you go through and get closer towards getting a skill certified. You can actually, you know, look at as you've ticked things in there. What we've got on the left-hand side, we've got, you know, the invocation over here, right? That's how we define what it is that you'll use to actually, you know, wake up this particular skill. We've got intents over here. So we're going to start by just creating a simple intent. So we're going to ask for NDC location. We'll create the custom intent, and we'll type in a couple of utterances. Where is NDC this year? Where is NDC located? Where in Australia is NDC, for example, right? So you can edit those, you know, you can delete them, etc. If we scroll down a little bit more, we've got something called the endpoints. Right? So this is what Mahesh was showing earlier in terms of the two options you've got. You've got the AWS Lambda, the ARN, or you've got an HTTPS endpoint. So at this point, I'm going to jump across into the Lambda interface. I might jump into this one rather. And just walk you through a little bit of what we did last night with the kids. So we used the Ask SDK, and I'll talk a bit about that later as well. In AGL, we've used that as well. But essentially what we've done in this example is we've defined a bunch of constants over here, which are the responses that Alexa will give back to the user, right? There are only one. You could obviously, you know, programming is, you know, is up to you guys. You could have, you know, multiple. You can do whatever you want to do with that. And then essentially, if we scroll down and take NDC location, for example, we've defined a bit of code here which deals with a handler, and essentially we're looking for an intent name that matches. So this particular intent needs to match the one that we've set up in Alexa, right? There are two different environments. The developer portal is a separate, you know, username and password to the AWS console. And then basically we handle it here. So as Mahesh was saying, you know, we speak out the constants with a simple card, the skill name, and the NDC location comes from the constant on the top. The skill name for AGL, if you've got, you know, one of these echo spots, it puts the AGL logo quite nicely in the top corner and then actually writes out whatever the response is. These can be the same, they can be different. And then essentially, you know, we've got a bunch of those for every single intent. And it's quite straightforward at the bottom. You know, for example, you just, you know, sign it to the skill builder, add a handler into the skill builder. You know, save, and that's your Lambda. Now, what we haven't done yet is how do you connect the two? For those of you familiar with Lambda, on the top we take the ARN from the top, copy, paste it into this particular region. So if you are multi-region, you know, you can have different Lambda functions for each different region. Now, the other thing as well is, and we'll touch a little bit on security later on, you can actually assign one Lambda function to one skill ID, right? So you can't have somebody else, building, a front end and hitting your Lambda function, for example, right? Because that ARN is unique. So you can actually put in a trigger on the back end in the Lambda function to say that's the only skill ID allowed to invoke that particular Lambda function. All right. So save the endpoints, go back to invocation, save the model, and we can then build the model. Building takes, toggle that up. To the invocation. Save that. And hopefully the build will trigger. Right, and the build will start. There are a couple of little gotchas here and there. The building takes probably 60 seconds, 90 seconds. When we were doing the workshop last night with the kids, it took 5 minutes, 10 minutes in some cases. But generally, it's pretty quick. All right. I think that's all I really want to show you at that point. We've got the JSON editor down here. So everything that you've seen that we've just done, right, is exportable out in a JSON editor. You can drag and drop. So you could build this back end, and you can actually upload it straight through here in the console.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah. So let's start looking at some of the tools that are there. It's already available that you can use to make your life a little bit easier. And that should pop up. Yeah. So one is there's a tool called skillinator.io. So what it does is, remember the schema file that Terence showed you? You'd be able to create, from the JSON file, you'd be able to create Lambda code itself. So just get you a bit of a head start. So you go in and paste that interaction model JSON file over here, and then you basically hit the generate button over there, and it'll just generate a whole bunch of Lambda code, node code over here. So then all you need to do is go and replace the little, for all the matching invocations, intents, you basically write the code for it. So it makes it a little bit easier for you. The second thing is creating all those utterances. So when you get started, there may be a lot of utterances that you want to add, like sample utterances. So this tool lets you put all the main words over here, and it'll start to generate like various combinations of this. In case it'll pick up like hello, say hi, hey, good day, and so on and so forth. It'll basically generate a whole bunch of these sample utterances as soon as you hit the generate button over here. So again, it's very easy for you to get started just by, rather than actually typing all of this yourself, it's just the tool does everything for you. The third one is around testing itself. So there is you can actually get started even without having an Echo device. So there's an Echo simulator. It's called EchoSim. So you go to echosim.io, and it allows you to test the whole thing in a browser. So literally you go in, click on that mic button, and then speak whatever you wanted to do, and then it'll respond as if it's a real device. Again,
this is very useful actually, because we've run a couple of volunteer days with school groups. And if you're teaching 120 kids, which we've done a couple times, this is a great tool. You don't have to have physical devices for each of the kids, so very, very useful.
Yeah. I mean, there is testing available from within the portal itself, but I think this is way better. I mean, it's much more easier to use than that. All right. So now that you've seen how to create a skill, there are various things that you want to. If you're just about to start, it's good to actually take these things into consideration before you get going, right?
So some things to think about. We've at AGL, all of our content, most of our content that's customer based, is dynamic, right? It comes from existing APIs. It comes out of ISAP platforms or other web APIs. If you've got existing APIs, integration, you've got Lambda code. You can hit any kind of back-end RESTful API. So if you've got existing APIs, that's a good way to start. If all your content needs authentication, you've got to consider that as well, right? We've done some work with schools from a volunteer perspective where we've just got contents on their website. What's the phone number? Who do I call if my kids are sick, for example? And that kind of content, you can pull out of S3 buckets, etc. But if you've got to authenticate users, you've got to think about that, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Are your customers multi-platform as well? So Google got a huge head start in Australia. Amazon was kind of late to the party in that sense, but they are catching up. But if majority of your customers are on Google, for example, that's something to think about as well. And how do you then build for a multi-platform environment? So what we've done at AGL, this is kind of a high level of our architecture. We use Auth0 as our identity provider. So when you first install the AGL app, you have to link your account. So we don't have any public content. You can, right? It does support that. You can have both authenticated and non-authenticated content. So when you link your skill for the first time, it'll bump you off to an Auth0 login page. It'll ask you to put in your username and your password. It'll link the accounts. Once that's happened, what happens is when we worked with Amazon back in the beginning of the year, all of the processing that happens here occurs in Oregon in the States. All right. So essentially, what's happening is, you're talking to Oregon in the States. Oregon in the States is coming back down to the AGL APIs. Our response is going back to Oregon. Oregon's going back to the device sitting on your table. So we're crossing the ocean a couple of times, right? So you'll notice the AGL skill takes about 2 to 3 seconds, and some of that latency is kind of unavoidable. I do believe it is the processing is coming to Australia at some point soon. So what happens is when you authenticate here, we use OAuth tokens. So we give Amazon a refresh token, right? That's an indefinite token that they use. Each time a customer invokes our skill, Amazon stores that refresh token, passes it to our API. Our API exchanges that for an access token. The access tokens are available for about 10 hours. So during that time, we want you to do a token exchange. Our API then has a bunch of microservices. So we've used a lot of the enterprise APIs that were previously built. And then basically we haven't had to touch these as well. So the API kind of does a bit of orchestration, right? It figures out, what are the accounts the customer's got? Does he have gas? Does he have electricity? If he does, go off and get his account balance, get his due date, get his usage, etc. So that's one of the advantages for us. We've kind of got a bit of a DevOps culture going at the moment. We've got a team that kind of supports it. They can make changes at any point this time and generally use all of the kind of enterprise APIs that are currently being built. So we've managed to do a lot of work in a very short period of time with this kind of microservice architecture.
Yeah. And in terms of team structure itself, I mean, one of the things that we need to understand is like when we started this whole thing, none of us knew how to program in Alexa. So we set up our team wasn't large. We had like 3 developers building this stuff, and we had like a BA and tester to support them, and we had a product owner. And the product owner wasn't full-time either, so sitting across multiple Scrum teams and so on. So there was a really small team, and so no prior knowledge, but of course, they were supported by like DevOps and architecture and security and so on and so forth. But predominantly, this team built pretty much everything. And what is it, like 3 sprints of 2 weeks each? We pretty much had most of it done. So what I'm trying to say is it didn't take us a lot of effort and everything to get going. Yes, we already had some APIs built, and we already had some APIs and so on. But pretty much it wasn't a lot of effort from our end. So it's worth noting that. I mean, like we had like primary school kids building an NDC app, in a couple of hours. But of course, this is different, right? It's more like an industrial strength. You still need to work through things like build pipelines and testing and everything else. So, but it still wasn't. It was fairly easy for us to do. One of the key things for us, of course, was designing for voice. That was actually a lot more difficult than you think it is. Primarily because we tend to think about conventional UX is all around visual user interfaces. Now this kind of like changes the paradigm a little bit. How many people have got Xbox over here? Right, a few people, right? Now Xbox had audio for a very long time, but however, that was never the primary way in which you actually interacted with Xbox. So people never used it, and they never built compelling user experiences with it. So it never took off. But when Amazon kind of like got these devices out, this was the only way to interact with the device. So you need to make sure that you kind of like had the responses and everything else. You kind of like need to make it completely foolproof. So it would come on with things like follow-up questions. I mean, if you think about a conventional UI, you would know exactly what are the things that you can actually click on and do and so on and so forth, right? But here you have nothing. So you need to have the right kind of prompts and a whole bunch of things to make sure that your user interface, your user experience works well. It's not super difficult, but I think it could take several attempts for you to get it right. So keep that in your mind when you do it.
I think the other thing for us as well was initially legal wanted to vet every single response that went out, right? So we had to send them, these are all the utterances that we have. Are you okay with all of these as well? That slowed us down. It's not the case now. We've cut some of that short as well.
Yeah. The other thing is like responses should be quick. I mean, we talk about network latency and things like that. I think the general guidance is, it's got to be at least you got to get a response within 8 seconds. But 8 seconds is a lot. I mean, most people would lose interest in a couple of seconds, if it doesn't come back, and you go like, oh, it's not working. Let me go with another question, right? So the general advice is if it takes too long, maybe play some music or something like that to actually keep it going, or tell them, hey, I'm processing this request or whatever it may be. Something to think about. Again, your response should be brief as well. I think there's a limit of what, 8,000 or 9,000? Yeah,
8,000
characters. But that's like half a book, right? You don't want to kind of like have talking for a while. Again, people have a very short span of attention, so you got to keep it short as well. Now, Amazon does a really good job of putting everything into the Alexa voice design guide. So if you are about to start, highly encourage you to go through this, or you get your team, the user experience team, to go through it and see how they can actually design for voice. It basically outlines all the best practices. And one of the key things that they say was, for each and every skill, create a dialogue between user and Alexa. And you want to focus on the happy part first, and once that's all working, and then you focus on some of the other exceptions. And writing scripts is a great way. So you kind of like go and say, well, hey, the user says, Alexa, open AGL, and what is the response you get? And then what is the follow-up thing that the user says, and so on and so forth. Right now, notice that you have this follow-up question over here. Would you like to pay it now? Is it a really good way of prompting and have this conversational thing going with the user, so they know what to say next? So that's really important. So when you get started, making sure identifying the intents is probably the first thing that you would do. So in our case, we effectively identified 8 intents. So once you identify those intents, you got to kind of come up with a bunch of utterances that people may say. And this could be quite complex as well. So the way you say, well, when is my account due? When do I need to pay my, when do I need to settle my account? People may actually ask so many different ways the same question. So you need to be in a position, I think you kind of like need to brainstorm not only with the user, maybe run a few workshops with customers to see how they're asking these questions as well. And so the general tips is like, for each and every intent, there's probably about 30 utterances that you may end up having. That's a general guide, right? Having said that, for one intent, we have about 4,500. So it's a lot. I think
that's the account balance one.
That's the account balance, right? So that's just a lot of ways people actually interact with it. So we have about 4,500. The limit is 1 meg on terms, but again, you don't want to hit that's a lot, right? That's a lot. So you don't want to hit that. So this is a general advice that we got from Amazon itself. Like everything that we said, we had like a follow-up question for every intent. So, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Was it, do you want to tip with it, and so on and so forth? The thing that we actually found is it kind of like got pretty complex in the end. So, all these kind of things got pretty complex. So I basically say, well, use caution when you kind of like do it, have follow-up questions and so on. Also think about cards. I mentioned this earlier, right? So initially, we were all thinking only about voice replies or voice responses. You need to think about, how does it actually show up on these devices as well? So you need to have cards for it. What is the visual equivalent of whatever the voice response? There's an intent history that is stored in Alexa, so you can go back and see what are the things that what are the commands, what are the utterances people are using for your skill. That's a really good way of learning, and we found that it's a little bit, you don't get every utterance that people have actually made. It actually filters it out somehow, and there's a basic limit. If you, for example, in a day, if you don't even use 10 of them, and you find this when you're initially testing it and so on, if it doesn't even register in there. So, but if you look at it, there's a fallback intent, which is effectively like if it doesn't know how to respond to it, it goes back into a fallback intent and handles it. So you can start to filter in all the fallback intents and see, hey, what are the utterances people are using that I've not been, that I'm not catering for. And then it'll give you an idea on, hey, these are the intents that people are looking for. Maybe create that, or maybe add utterances to help the user as well, right? So those are things that you can actually do.
That's important to know. That's actually, this is a new feature. We still don't have this in production at this point in time. It's only come out in the last couple of months. So yeah, we're working on it right now, but yeah, that's the catch-all. We actually had to have a crafted fallback intent, with all kinds of random.
Yeah, and the utterances are also anonymized. So you actually don't see which user has actually done this and so on. It's all the privacy stuff that Amazon is very, very picky about, or rightly so. So sometimes you may want to add a little bit more to your voice itself. Remember that when we asked AGL, the NDC app for the password, it actually whispered the password, right? So how do you do it? I mean, there's something called SSML, Speech Synthetics Markup Language, and the responses actually support that. So in your response, if you basically said, hey, I want to tell you a secret, I'm not a real human, that actually whispers that back to the user. So you can kind of like play around with it. There are other things that you can actually do. For example, you can play like an audio as part of your response. You can break for a couple of seconds in your response. You can do things like that. This is an interesting one. Let's say when you have AGL as part of the response, right? It may say it out as AGL, so that doesn't come out quite well. Of course, you can split it as A space G space L, but this is a bit more natural. You can say, well, interpret this as characters, and so it will say it as AGL. This one is a bit interesting. If you have digits, right? So you want to say, your membership number 6,583,904 may not be intuitive to the user. So again, you may say interpret it as digits.
That's right. And we had that problem. So when we first submitted to Amazon for certification, they came back saying, why is the account number 16 billion something, right? So, and they failed the certification because of that, right? So yeah, that's a lesson learned from us as well.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go through each and everything in SSML, but there are a whole bunch of things, including phonetics. You say tomato, I say tomato. You can basically play around with how that is actually pronounced and so on. So there's a lot of things in SSML itself that you can actually spend your time looking at. Security is a big thing. So
yes, so just look, touching on a few key things here, really. So we use long-lived tokens. So we said, Amazon's got that refresh token that does not expire, right? If you're going on that path and you've got linked accounts, you probably want to figure a way for your customers to be able to invalidate that particular token, right? So Auth0, which we use, does have the capability. We haven't implemented it at this point in time, but we've got a manual process. As if a customer calls up and says, my device was stolen, please invalidate my Alexa skill, right? It's like when you use Facebook to authenticate to a third party, you can go and check all the apps, right? So that's something to think about. Privacy data consideration is another one, right? So we had to go through significant legal and security approval because of the offshore bit going into the States, right? So we had to make sure that all of our data was de-identified. Our addresses, so when it says, if you've got multiple properties, right? So that's also an example I showed today. But if you've got a beach house in your own house, we say, is it the house at 143, in city blah, right? And then say yes, wonderful, yes. So we don't actually repeat the whole address. We don't put out full name instead of birth, anything like that. You've got to think about that because it is leaving offshore.
We even took out the account number, right? So
we took out the account numbers as well, right? It wasn't necessary. We really cut it down, right? Because you've already linked the account, so you kind of should know which account number it was. Multi-factor authentication for sensitive tasks. We don't have this, but we're looking at it right now to be able to pay your bill. So you could say, Alexa, pay my AGL bill now. I'm happy to pay it, and uses the direct debit that's on file. The banks are doing it a different way. I use NAB, and you go into the NAB app, they give you a code, and you use that through Alexa, and it's a one-time thing, so it's outside of the app. That's something to think about if you've got sensitive tasks.
Yeah, and the sensitive tasks is quite interesting, right? Let's say you go crazy and you build all this home automation things and everything else, and they've got these August locks as well. That's all hooked up. In fact, one of the things that it doesn't let you do is it'll let you lock the door, but it doesn't let you open the door. I mean, you got to think about some of those things as well when you're doing like home automation. You can basically say, well, hey Alexa, open the garage door. Hey Alexa, open the security shutters and things like that. And what prevents someone from actually shouting through the kitchen window? So, hey Alexa, open the front door, and then so you need to make sure how you actually cater for things like that, right?
That's right. And Dolphin Attack is something that came out earlier in the year as well. All the devices are subject to what they call the Dolphin Attack. So it's sub audio. We can't hear it as human beings, but you can play it through different frequencies, and all the devices were subject to it. So that might explain why Alexas go off in the middle of the night, in apartment buildings and play music.
Yeah.
All right. Testing. So it's just things to call out really. Manual versus automated testing. We have a lot of automated testing. We have not got end-to-end automated testing despite the resources that we've put into this, right? One of the reasons why end-to-end testing is hard, our testers have come to us saying we've got 4,500 utterances, right? Each one takes 5 seconds to test. That's 3 days for an automated test to run. We pick the happy path. We pick the key utterances and we test it. There is a Markup framework that you can use to simulate Amazon requests as well. You can solve some of these problems by multi-threading and whatever. Like that's just another whole problem to solve and not really worth the value. Beta testing for up to 500 people, we do some of that as well. Testing for accents, so we get people from different backgrounds to come into a room that's pretty quiet as well. This thing is very, very sensitive.
Yeah.
But that's some of the testing you've got to do for different locales.
Amazon, so you don't have to really worry about it because Amazon does a pretty good job of interpreting those accents and everything else, but it'd be good to see if it just works well. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. And then we do testing, linking and unlinking of accounts as well. So you've got to think about that in production. If your account linking isn't working, no one can even use the skill, right? So that's some of the stuff to think about as well. Hopefully we'll get some time, but I'll show you the CLI just quickly. But certification, look, building a skill can all be automated fully. There's a command line interface that Amazon gives. You can build a skill, you can add intense utterances, you can deploy it. You can push it all the way for certification all through command line. We do parts of it. We pull out the definitions of our skill into GitHub, right? We don't do full end-to-end automation just yet. It's still tested by humans. We still go in and we actually press a button to certify our app as well. Amazon does give you detailed feedback. There are human beings testing, and they're pretty good. They'll actually give you the exact samples of things that went wrong, which is really good. There are inconsistencies. Sometimes things get through. There's an offshore team of Amazon here in Australia that tests first up for us, and then it goes to an offshore team somewhere else, right? And we often pass here and fail there, right? For small things sometimes. And then don't underestimate the time to get certified. Certification you can't control, right? So when you press for certification, it can happen from that point on up to, we see, 3 to 5 days, right? So you can't say, I want it to be live now. You can't control it. Once it's live in the store. It's published. And even now, even with us with the partnership, it still takes up to a week. There's probably some kind of a queuing system. They just get the highest on the log gets certified. All right, we've got a few minutes for some.
Yeah, let's do a few more demos. Do you want to come here? You good?
I think we're okay here. I'm just going to bend over a bit. How are we doing? The flash briefing that Mahesh talked about earlier, right? Flash briefings are another feature of these devices. They're a different skill altogether, right? But they're very, very basic. All they basically do is point to an RSS feed. So it can be an XML feed, can be a JSON feed, right? So when you say, Alexa, give me my flash briefing, you go into the app and you pick which skills you want as part of your flash briefing. It could be the news, could be the weather, and it could be one other thing. Essentially, that's all it is, right? It's a file as simple as this. It picks up the description from a particular item. It can be one or more items, and it'll read that out today, right? So it's really quick and easy to set up flash briefings. The problem with flash briefings, though, is there is no account linking. There's some capability within their UI that says enable account linking. When you click on it, it says this is not available for flash briefings. So when we contacted Amazon, they said, look, there's no plans right now to have account linking for flash briefings, because we had a great use case. We wanted to basically go, hey, Alexa, tell me my flash briefing, and it goes, there might be an electricity outage in your area today, right? Unfortunately, we get no parameters from Amazon. You don't even get the Amazon account ID that's enabled it. So, we get none of the server-side variables from Amazon coming to our side. So it's all anonymous. Amazon also caches flash briefings as well. It's one of the features. So you might not even see it hits the back end to pull out your RSS feed. They cache it for a configurable time, 1 hour, 8 hours, or I think it's every day as well. So flash briefings are kind of out of your hand. You put it out there, and it's kind of general for everybody. You can't have customized flash briefings. But they're pretty simple and straightforward if they're just kind of news-based. Blueprints is the other one that's really interesting. So last night we did 3 things. In 2 hours, we did 3 things with 10-year-old students, and there were a couple a little bit older and maybe a couple a bit younger. Blueprints is Amazon's new offering that's come out. It's available in the States. You can't get it in Australia just yet. But if you've ever been to an Airbnb or you've been to a hotel and they give you this, a whole book of all the instructions of where everything's at, Amazon has come out with Blueprints and said, hey, create a skill for your house guests. So your house guests can, ask an Alexa, go, where's the remote control? What's the code, to get out the front door? Or where's the nearest shops or whatever it is, right?
Oh, what's the Wi-Fi password?
What's the Wi-Fi password? Yeah, that's a huge one. That one won the one of the events that Amazon ran. They gave away $250,000 to the winner, and it was the Wi-Fi password. So really good. There's a whole bunch of things you can do in here, right? Like we did trivia with the groups last night, and if I just if I go through as an example, it deploys Lambda functions in the back end. So you make your own, and you all configure it in the front end. So you pick your you define your experience. It'll use SSML in the back end. It'll play chimes when things start, etc. You give it a name, you click build, and kind of Bob's your uncle, and off you go. So really, really, really useful. And if you look at kind of the list that Amazon does provide, everything from burns to Father's Day things, down to facts, down to stories for kids. I think the latest Alexa thing was a story reading device. Sci-fi fables, adventures, all about dad, mom, etc. So that's Blueprints. Sits slightly outside of the console. It's a new console that they've put together. There's one other thing before I show you the CLI that I just wanted to mention quickly is we are looking at push notifications. You can do push notifications for these devices. The ring lights up when a message is waiting for you to basically read your messages back. You have to get specific approval for Amazon. They don't give you access to any of the documentation unless they've whitelisted your email account. But yes, they give you then access to the APIs in the back end. But essentially, you can push APIs into a queue, messages into an API queue. And once the customer's read the message, it disappears off the queue. But yeah, push notifications, we are actually working on it. That'll hopefully come out in the near future.
The CLI is probably the last one you want to
The last one, just quickly, is the CLI. So, sorry, I've scrolled earlier. But essentially, there's a CLI you can deploy. So you can do everything from creating skills to getting skills, deleting, updating, get all the models. You can get the validation status, and at some point you can submit or you can withdraw it from certification as well. So if you're a full DevOps CI/CD all the way through, that can all be scripted right from the back end. And actually, we do parts of it, not all of it, just because we want some control. But that's pretty sophisticated, and the documentation is pretty good as Amazon usually is.
Cool. So what's next for AGL? I suppose from our point of view, we want to create more intents. So we've got a backlog of intents that we want to create, and we want to release like a voice channel for Google Home as well. So all the work that we've done, we're trying to see how we can do it for both Google and Amazon. And we've chucked in a whole bunch of useful links. We'll end up sharing the slides. Just a bit of links over there. And then finally, we just wanted to finish this up with this video, and hopefully the audio works this time. Let's see. Oh, it does work.
Playing jazz.
Playing jazz.
Smoothie.
Making smoothie.
Calendar.
No meetings today. Remember, dentist at 9:30.
Fire off.
Fire off.
Open door.
Door open.
And we're gonna do one more.
Oh yeah. Open door.
Wrong voice command.
Open door.
Wrong voice command.
Open door.
Repeat that.
Open door.
I didn't understand that.
Hey, open door.
Play on the floor.
Get over the door. Open the door.
Wrong voice command. Error.
Hey there. With a rock. Open door. Open door.
Higher volume. Higher.
All right. Hopefully, you don't get to that, right? All right. So that's the end. I think we're just about ready to finish up. Any questions? We're happy to take them, right? And make sure that when you fill your, just do your feedback on the way. It's green. That's the color that you need to choose, right?
If I could just, Amazon tomorrow is running a hands-on workshop creating a skill start to end. So if I could just promote that, that's probably a good place to go to if you wanted to kind of go to the next level, right? But otherwise, yeah, we're here for questions if anybody has any. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for your time, guys.